Just live. So I see a couple of attendees showing up, and hopefully people as up. Oh yeah, now they're all sitting there waiting in the holding area. Hello everybody. I'm so glad you're able to join us. We'll just give it a few minutes as folks sort of come in and they connect. I'm really excited about our presentation today. And so I think this should be a really good one. Let's just give it another 2 or 3 minutes. Fantastic. I see people piling in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So. One thing I will say while we're waiting to get started, there is a chat function for the webinar, and if at any point during the presentation you have questions, throw them into the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on that and read them out, and we'll try to get your questions answered. And if we don't for some reason get to your questions during the webinar, then I will make sure that we get your contact information, we get you hooked up with Thad, who is our presenter, and he will get answers for you into the best of his ability, because that is awesome, but you don't have to take my word for it. So let's give it a few more minutes. We're actually just about 1-2. I'm on time for a change. So, all right. Well, I hope everybody is doing well. All right, we've got 25 attendees so far, 26, very nice, very nice. I told you, Thad, a lot of people want to hear about this because we all get confused by it. All right, 28, nice. Well, it is about that time, so I will get started with our introduction here. Welcome everybody to the October meeting of CSINext, which is our virtual chapter. And as I have said numerous times to my board members, we've never been more relevant to the world than we are right now. But if you're not a member of CSINext, I highly encourage you to think about it. We're a lot of fun people. We have great presentations, and we're trying to figure out ways to get more involved with everything. So that being said, we have a fabulous presentation today, which is going to be Understanding UL Fire Resistance Directories 101. And I know most of us architects, we end up having to use the UL directory sooner or later. And it was it wasn't easy when we had the big old orange books, but at least you could sort of flip around and sort of keep finding things. So I find it personally a little harder with the website. I end up going through my fireproofing rep, or I end up talking to my gypsum rep, somebody who's very knowledgeable like that. Now, Thad is with National Gypsum. He is the former previous president of CSINext. He happens to be a good friend of mine. He's very knowledgeable. He's been doing drywall pretty much since he was out of diapers. I think that's a fair assessment. It wasn't certainly right about the time you got out of diapers. So he's got over 40 years of experience with drywall and with the whole gypsum industry. So he's going to tell us everything we need to know, or at least a lot of it anyway. So Thad, are you about ready to get started?
I'm ready if you are.
All right. That being said, welcome everybody to the October meeting. It's great to have you. Stay tuned at the end. We're going to talk about what our next month's meeting is going to be about, which is going to be really fabulous. Just to give you a sneak preview, in November, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of construction estimating. And we've got a really knowledgeable speaker who's going to talk to us about that. And that, I think, is something we can all learn more about. Keep your eyes tuned to the email and to the CSINext website to see what's going on. That being said, Thad, why don't you take it away and tell us all about UL Fire Directories, please.
Okay, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. This presentation is an AIA registered presentation. It carries 1 credit, health, safety, and welfare in addition. This will be provided to you after the webinar. Traditionally, what we do in CSINext is at the end of this presentation, you will get a survey. Please fill out the survey, and that's how we verify that you were here for the entire time. And then there will be a list that will be sent over to us at National Gypsum, and then we will record your AIA credit, and we will send a certificate to everyone who is in attendance today, even if they are not AIA members, because there are different types of self-reporting that need to be done. This presentation is copyrighted, which means I cannot give it to you in raw form, but if you see a slide, a series of slides, or would like to have the PowerPoint as a backup for some of the things we go over today, because it'll be a fast-paced presentation, I'll be happy to provide that. And that being said, like Kathy says, here's what we're going to talk about. Since all of us can read, I will tell you that basically the Reader's Digest version of this is we're going to learn a little bit about how to get on the UL online directory, what it is, how it works, and we're going to use Gypsum as the way that we do that because that's what I'm familiar with. So understanding who UL is makes a big difference. Underwriters Laboratories is the 900-pound gorilla in the independent testing stage. They've been around since the 1800s. If you remember correctly, there was this little tiny fire in Chicago in the 1800s, and there was this big need afterwards for fire protection in our industry. And still today, they're located in Naperville, Illinois, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago. So they're still in their home base. They've been there for over 100 years. Got over 22 billion, it says 20 on the slide, but it's 22 billion UL marks that appear on different products across 99 different countries. There are other testing agencies in there. You may have heard of Intertech or other people. There's other people that do what they do, but they're the 900-pound gorilla. You go to their UL website, it's pretty simple, ul.com. Not hard at all to remember. This is a slide that has a lot of graphics in it. I promise there won't be very many of these. This is one of 2 that's going to be pretty wordy. But basically what this slide says is you can directly reproduce anything from the UL website exactly as it appears if you do not alter it and if you give them credit. So the statement that reprinted from the online certifications directory with permission from UL must appear on your material. So feel free to use anything that you want. It's totally free for the architectural world to use. When you go to their website, you type in ul.com, which I did earlier today, you'll see a slide similar to this. I say similar to this because these pictures are banners that scroll every few seconds, 30 or 40 seconds, you'll see a different picture. But you'll see at the top the little UL red marking and the offerings, industries, insights, exactly. Everything there, you'll know you're at the right place. To find something in UL, you want to scroll to the very bottom of this page, the landing page. And you'll find a new feature there. It's about 18 months old called Product IQ. It's been updated 4 or 5 times in the past 18 months. Prior to that, you just opened up the page and there was just like a search bar, kind of like Google. You just got a generic search bar and you kind of had to know what you wanted to put into it. Now, if you do happen to know, if you use a particular UL often enough and you wanted to copy it or have some updated information about it, it's quicker just to Google whatever that U465 or whatever the number is, and you'll get a quicker hit. But let's say you're working on a set of plans and you're not 100% sure what you want, you're looking for something that will help you solve a problem with fire-related issues, this is how you would do it. So you go to the ul.com, you scroll to the very bottom of the page, and where the purple arrow is, you have Product IQ. Interestingly enough, if you haven't been to UL for some time, probably about that 18 months to 2-year time frame, you never used to have to register. But now they're going to ask you to access Product IQ, and you're going to get this particular page. You're going to have to log in or register for free. Now, once you do this, I did this about, like I said, almost 2 years ago when this first happened. We were aware this was going to happen, but we were told as manufacturers it was going to happen, but we didn't know when, and one day it just popped up. I registered that one time. I've never had to register again since. As a matter of fact, I had to go to my wife's computer to basically be able to reproduce this slide because I don't see it any longer. So you log in, and then it remembers you with your cookies or whatever, and you're there forever. There's no cost to it. And again, UL builds in several layers of redundancy. If you happen to sit down at your computer with no idea of what you're going to do, let's say you're in the office. I know many of us aren't, but if you were in the office and somebody walked by and said, oh yeah, by the way, you need blah, 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 then you could, right here, you could create that number, you could put that in there, and it would take you right there. If you still have no idea, if you don't have that person walking by, if you're working out of your home, and you had no idea what you were looking for, the purple arrow down below on the bottom left that takes you to UL Architectural Services is the correct place to go. So again, we've gotten in, we've logged in, we've come to this Product IQ landing slide. We go to the Architectural Services slide to give us some more information. This particular piece of information, this is kind of a collection of the different places that UL will take you. Now remember, there's 66,000 different manufacturers and 22 billion different marks in this, 22 billion different places you could go. If you're interested in sustainable information, the iSpot, the UL Sustainable Spot products spot is the great place to go because it'll give you a lot of information about sustainable products that meet certain requirements. Where we're going to go to the Find Walls, Roofs, Floors, where that purple arrow is. We'll move right there. But you could also find fire stopping information. You could find joint systems. You could find perimeter fire containment systems. You can get UL continuing AIA courses. So there's a lot of different options that you can get, but we're assuming you're looking for a specific fire rated assembly and you're working on.
I do have
yes.
Sorry, yes. I have a question about that. What happened to Architect Chat?
Architect Chat was something that they had. It's been replaced basically by a search, by your search bar up here. If you go to the search, you would kind of have to go through that area. That search, that chat no longer exists to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, if someone knows that to be different, if there's an option, if there's a function that I'm not aware of, please let me know, because we used to use that quite a bit as well, and it went away. So again, we click on Find Walls, Roofs, and Columns. There's some changes that they did here, and maybe this is one of the reasons why they took some of it away, was because they've made things a lot clearer than they used to. Again, if you look at these walls and areas, you've got 2,000 results here, basically a base template. On the left-hand side, there's a search template that you can start to narrow down what you want to get million marks. You can click on things like metal lath and panels. You can put a company name in there if you want to, but most companies have so many different marks you wouldn't want to use that. We've chosen gypsum board, just because that's the industry that we're in. 1 and 2 hour ratings. If you look down there at the ratings, you can click on STC ratings if you want as well. We haven't chosen to do that. And so we've taken, just by doing those 2 or 3 little things, we've moved ourselves down to about 150 different assemblies. The other nice thing that UL has done is UL has started to put some clearer graphics. It used to be when you did a search like this, you just get the numbers, that U465 that's circled in purple in the middle. You would get nothing but that. You'd get a series of different hyperlinks. In this particular case, they've changed it to the point where you can quickly scroll through several different pages if you need to and kind of say, oh yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right there. That's what I think I want. And then you can click on that link. So they've tried to make it a little more friendly so that you can narrow things down closer and closer to find what you want. When you get to a slide, when you get to a system that you want to look at, we've chosen a non-bearing 1 hour rated wall, probably something that's in just about every commercial job anywhere. There's a couple things I'd like to call out. You see the UL design number to make sure you're in the right place. You'll see a date there, and what this date is October 2nd, 2019, which means that is the last time that this particular assembly has been updated. So if you'd come back 2 days from now and there would be a different date there, you'd know that something had changed, and maybe if you didn't find what you wanted earlier, you'd be able to find it now. A couple other things that are important, and I'm going to call them out here in a slide. If you look at the light blue, see general information for fire resistance ratings in the top. There's one for the United States and there's one for Canada. And I know that I've probably got some Canadian friends on the call today. But understand where these links will take you to the first 10 pages of the UL directory. So what's going to happen is you're not always going to find exactly what you want from a perspective of searches, because we build unique buildings. Every single building is unique in some way, whether it's the site or the structure or something about the code systems of where we're at. We as manufacturers can't anticipate every single type of situation you're going to be in. So there is about, when I talked to Richard Wolke, I did a presentation with him at the state code officials presentation. I did one in Michigan, and I did one in Ohio a couple years ago. He said there's close to 200 different variations that you can get from almost any assembly if you know how to manipulate the system and what you're looking for. There are things that you can do to improve the system in the situations that you're in. So that's the link that you would click on to get to the first 10 pages of the UL directory. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what that actually is. So if you click on that link, it will give you different metrics of different ways that you can learn more about the tests, the definitions. We're going to choose gypsum board because that's the industry that I'm living and I'm familiar with. And when you do that, it gives you some general idea of some things that you can change or that you can alter in that assembly to improve the fire rated systems, but to help get you past the fact that there may not be something exactly like what you're trying to build or something that exactly like what you've designed to get you to the minimum rating that you need to be able to get your fire rating. And we're going to go through several of these points, so I'm not going to linger on this one. But we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to talk to you just about how UL goes through the rigorous ideas of the way that they test these different systems. ASTM sets the standards for all of their testing. The hourly ratings test is ASTM E119. This chamber is a 4-hour chamber. You can see the brick and the block on both sides of it. This is a 4-hour chamber where there's a wall that will slide in from the left-hand side, slide in from the right-hand slide into the left to get to there. This is a vertical application test. You can see the joints run vertically. Those numbers are thermocouples that are placed within an inch or so where UL tells us as an industry, as the gypsum industry, as the wall testing industry, where those need to be tested because they know where the weak spots are. And so they're going to test, we're going to burn that fire from the other, we're going to burn that wall from the other side. We're going to burn that entire assembly, and we're going to get a different rating for it depending on how it performs. So we're going to watch a short video now that will show you how that happens.
Today's test, one of many, is the ASTM E119, used to measure the integrity of building assemblies and materials subjected to fire exposure. Because of tests like these and our NGC, today's test.
Okay, so what you just saw there was a fire rated assembly test. Now remember, fire ratings are assemblies, not individual products. A fire rated type X product will be able to contribute to a fire rated assembly test. And so the way this works is in this ASTM E119 is there's a time and temperature curve that we need to meet to require our products to meet the rigorous guidelines that are set by UL. At 5 minutes inside that chamber, you can see the lights inside that chamber. We've lit it from the back. You saw the thermocouple. You saw the thermocouples on the front and them lighting the fire in the back. We need to have reached 1,000 degrees in that chamber. So the paper burns off pretty quickly from the first side of the drywall. And at 1 hour, we have to have reached 1,700 degrees. Now, why 1,700 degrees? Well, every safety test builds in a factor of something. In a typical fire, you're going to have between 1,200 and 1,300 degrees. A house fire, a regular office fire. Now, that's not a chemical fire, but a regular fire will be in that area. And so we're stretching the limits of what we can do with that particular product. And then at the end, when it comes out, we'll show a little piece of this pressurized hose stream test again. You'll see the assembly. You'll see that the drywall is most of the joint compound is burned off. The papers burn off. It's calcined gypsum on that side. And as soon as that hose hits it, you can see the steam start to rise off of it because it's so hot. That's basically the sacrificial layer of the drywall for that assembly.
3, 2, 1, go.
So the idea behind this is we're trying to protect what's on the other side of the wall that you see there on the right-hand side in that picture. And there are some rules in addition to whether the drywall stands or not. Number one, it can't collapse. Well, in this particular case, it didn't. You can tell that. You can see the home stream has been on it. You can see the gypsum, calcined gypsum on the bottom of the floor falling into the cavity. You can see the watermarks on the drywall. On the other side of that wall, the average of all the thermocouples must not exceed 250 over the ambient temperature in the testing lab. And no single one can exceed 325. And then there can be no penetration at all showing on the other side of that assembly and no evidence of burn through. To show you how stringent the test is, here's an example And as you look, this is after a host stream test. You can look, if you look at the bottom on the right-hand side by that WP 1995, you can see the watermarks, you know, floating through this side, the other side of the gypsum. This is a test that was failed. It was failed because of that tiny crack there in the joint. That's a fail. Even though if we were in a fire, we were standing on this side of that wall, and the life safety people had come and put out the fire in the other room, we would still be relatively fine. But according to the safety standards of UL, this is a fail. Now, there's a couple other reasons why it probably wouldn't have made it. And if you look at the thermocouples between 1, 6, 10, and 3, you can see that board is scorched and it was ready to ignite at any minute. So there's another reason. I guarantee you those thermocouples, when we average them together, would have been over the 325 over ambient temperature. So it's a pretty rigorous test. It's a 10 by 10 chamber. There's also a 14 by 18 chamber that we use to do floor ceiling assembly tests. And you can see the gentleman standing there on the left-hand side. These are pre-designed. They're built by UL personnel. And then they're put over this particular, instead of a vertical application, they're put over here where we'll actually burn this, and I'll show a picture right here. We'll throw this assembly down there and hope it doesn't collapse. They'll test it for the time rate that's needed to be, or until it collapses, and then figure out how much protection was in there. And just in front of that person that you're standing there with the hard hat there, you can see a little cavity down below, and there's actually an observation area down there, and there's a technician down there as well with the same type of equipment testing the thermocouples on the top of this particular piece of equipment. So pretty rigorous testing. So again, fire ratings pertain to the entire assembly. A finish rating is the time it takes to get to an average temperature rise of 250 degrees between the material being tested and the wood material, the wood framing. This is typically a finish rating, is the test that we typically don't think about in the commercial market because it's used for the wood people to protect their materials. So fire ratings, we often get questions about finish ratings, but finish ratings really don't have much meaning for what we do in the commercial market for the steel stud market. Catherine referenced it earlier. They used to have these great big volumes that were beautiful. You stack them up on top of each other and they'd be about 3 inches, 4 inches high. And everything you ever wanted to know was in there. They quit making these after 2018. So if you have some in your office, hang on to them. They're no longer produced. It's all online now. This is the way they were laid out. There was volume 3 with the dampers and fire doors. There was 2 volumes for your MEP, which makes sense because that's where a lot of your protection needs to be done. You've got 2A and 2B. So when you go back and forth, you can see that the wording is the same, the verbiage is the same. There was just that much in there. And then where we live in the gypsum industry is typically producing products that protect all of the things, the beams and the columns and the roofs and the floors. Anything that was in these books, there's never anything deleted from these books. And if the materials still exist, those tests are still valid and those things are still current. So if you have them, and I have a couple of old copies that I use that are dog-eared, and I have certain notations because I tend to get the same questions from people all the time, so I can quickly find them. If you're the type of person that likes books and likes to use these, understand that every day they're making changes as new tests are run. So you would want to find what you wanted in this book, and then you'd want to go to the UL directory online to make sure you had the most up-to-date information. Earlier, there was a link where I referenced the first 10 pages of the UL directory, and that's the roadmap that tells you how to operate the system, how to make changes, how to do things a little differently to get past the authority having jurisdiction, the plan reviewer that you're working with. Anybody that has any questions, those first 10 pages of the UL directory, and I showed the links both for the US and for Canada that will take you to those areas. And one of the things that's on the... Yes.
I'm sorry. I do have a question from one of our attendees. Says, we are being asked by AHJs to provide the test assembly interior info for interior partitions on our drawings in the form of pages / graphics of the testing assembly as provided by the testing lab, in most cases UL. Have you run across that? Some assemblies are multiple pages of information. I wonder, in your experience, what's the best solution to satisfy the AHJ?
Yes, excellent question. One of the nice things about the online directory is that, and we'll show it here in a second, you can actually print out, if you go to a specific assembly, you can print out either in paper or as a PDF, you can print out that particular assembly, or you can email them a link. So we can transfer information a lot quicker than we used to. So you could literally, if that AHJ had an iPad or an iPhone on the, or a cellular phone on the job site, you could send them the link to show them, here's the minimum requirements for this assembly. And then we'll talk about, if you can't find an exact assembly, but you've referenced one, here's the assembly that you have, and here's the modifications we made to make sure that we've gone and exceeded past what we have. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, come back to me.
And so one of the other says, in our office, we use them as an appendix to the project manual. And I've seen that done, and I've seen them still put on drawings. If it's one specific assembly that's very important. So there are different ways of doing that. So,
yes, and the nice thing is you can take a base assembly, and we'll talk a little bit here in a little while about some of the different ways you can alter assemblies with different parts of the building. You can take a base assembly and then start to, by knowing how it's constructed and what it looks like and what the rest of it is, you can mix and match materials to give you the same hourly rating in different parts of the building with different requirements. And so in these first 10 pages, one of the things that we highlighted earlier was the gypsum piece. And inside the gypsum piece, they give you some variations that you can make, and they give you some guidelines so you can talk to the authority having jurisdiction and get some information from them. For example, if you're working in wood frame construction and you've got an older UL 301, 309, something like that, that was done with nails, screws can be substituted as long as they're substituted 1 for 1 with the same equal or exceed requirements for the specified nails. In other words, if that, in the gypsum world, when we started to use screws, one of the reasons why we did that was because screws were faster, number one, and they held better. So if you have a test that's tested with screws, you'll typically see 8 and 8 spacing, or you'll see 12 and 12 spacing, different variations like that. If it was done with nails, you're probably seeing every 6 inches on center. Well, if the UL that you tested with nails, you'd have to put your screws in 6 inches on center, or the manufacturer would have to run a new test. So that's just one variation that you can make if you've got an older UL from a wood assembly that's a little unique that no one else has run. That's why they would do that. Now, let me just rest here for a second and just say something for those of you on the phone or on the webinar. There are reasons why there's not assemblies tested every day exactly like you're looking for. And the one reason is a typical wall test starts about $10,000 and can run as much as $50,000 depending on the complexity and the rating of it. A floor ceiling test starts about $40,000 and goes to $65,000 or $100,000 depending on the complexity of it. So that's, if you cannot find a test, there's probably a reason, and the reason is it's not common enough that any manufacturer has seen the need to test it. And that's why we allow these variations. That's why UL has made these exceptions. Another exception is the orientation of the drywall. Typically when a drywall test is done, it's done vertically or horizontally applied to the studs. If it's applied horizontally, that's harder to pass. So if you have a test that's been passed horizontally and the contractor wants to stand it up for some reason, you're going to automatically get that vertical application. So understand, if it's applied vertically, it has to, if the test was done vertically, it has to be applied vertically. If it was done horizontally, you have options. So there's times where we'll run a horizontal test from a standpoint of putting our gypsum board applied to the studs, because we know once we get that, we've automatically got 2 different variations. Without exception, a fire test needs to be fire taped. Now, it doesn't have to be pretty. The mud can go on just about like it looks in that picture. It can, as long as it's embedded in, as long as somebody wipes that tape down tight, it can be as thick or as ugly as it needs to. As a matter of fact, when I was a drywall contractor, we used to send our youngest guy up into the plenum area to do the fire taping because we didn't care what it looked like. And as long as it was the tape held to the wall and was embedded correctly, the fire test would pass. So all the joints need to be covered, and the nail holes, any penetration needs to be covered. There is a difference with single layer as opposed to base layer, multi-layer systems. In a multi-layer system, you do not need to do the bottom layer unless it was specifically tested that way, and most of them are not. So multi-layer systems is not the base layer, it's only the exterior layer that's exposed to the flame. You would need to stagger the joints. Gypsum board thicknesses are minimums. You can always, and again, if you think about this from a perspective of the testing agency, UL tests to the minimum, Intertech tests to the minimum. Most manufacturers test to the minimum, and then we can always add layers, we can always make things better. An additional layer of gypsum board is permitted in any application, and it will not affect the fire rating. As a matter of fact, it will enhance it, you just won't get credit for it. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, occasionally we'll see people build 2 layers on each side of a wall, even though they only need a 1-hour rating, because they're looking for sound attenuation. So if you want to take your wall from a 47 to a 55 or a 57 STC, you might use additional layers of drywall. That does not affect the fire rating. By the same token, years ago, I worked on a hotel project where we had 4 different types of drywall in a bathroom. I had 75 guys on that job. There is no way in the world I could keep track of 75 people in 4 different types of drywall in a tiny little room. So I went to the authority having jurisdiction. And I said, I don't want to put 1/2 inch on this wall. I don't want to put green board on that wall. I want to do 5/8 green board. And that's how long ago it was. It was green board. We still had that. I want to put 5/8 green board in the entire job, in this entire room, because that way I don't have to worry about anybody putting anything in the wrong spot. I had a fire rating on 3 of those walls. They still met the fire rating because the gypsum board thickness was greater than the one that was on one of the walls. So again, understand sometimes when your contractor comes to you asking for changes, they might have a good reason as opposed to just trying to save money. Sometimes now you still need to be aware of what those are, and that's why we're doing presentations like this. Everything we've said so far has been vertical application. We've had gravity working for us. If you're burning something, you've got gravity working for you. As soon as you turn a piece of drywall horizontally, all the rules change. So understand, in this particular picture, in this from a floor ceiling perspective, whatever the tested assembly was with those tested materials, if you want to add anything to it, you're going to have to put something else on that bottom layer of drywall. Now, why would you want to do that? In this particular picture, let's assume that you wanted to increase your R value. You wanted to get a little more insulation value. You're using a prescriptive method to be able to avoid using continuous insulation, or your owner just said, I want to have a little more thermal protection up in that plenum area, in that roof truss area. When you add additional products, and remember what I said earlier about when we put the fire in that assembly, we burn it from one side. So in this case, it would be burning from the bottom up. And that bottom layer of paper is going to be damaged fairly quickly. 70% of the strength of a piece of drywall is in the paper or the glass mat that's wrapped around it. So in that particular case, we typically want to add another layer of drywall to this to act as a sacrificial layer.
The gypsum in the core of the board actually emits steam when exposed to fire and retards the transfer of heat through the panel.
So basically, drywall has chemical water in it. And that's why it's so effective in a system like this, in a fire-rated system. Now, there's several things going on in this picture. Let me give you an explanation. It's 50 minutes and 39 seconds into a 1-hour fire test. I can see that in the bottom left-hand corner with the 50:39. This is a load-bearing test. How do I know it's a load-bearing test? Well, look underneath the steps of that ladder, you'll see some hydraulic jacks. And we're putting pressure on that wall when UL is putting pressure on this wall when they test that wall. Because the wall doesn't know whether there's 2 stories above it. All the wall knows is there's a certain amount of pressure. And so that's why it's done at UL, is that's why we test multiple layers. We don't build multiple layers. We put strain on that particular bottom layer, that what would be the first floor. We put as much strain on that as we need to simulate the same sort of a thing. It's a vertical test. And this is, because it's a load-bearing test, every 5 minutes, that fella there wanders up those stairs, and I don't know if you can see it or not, you should be able to, between the 4, the 5, and the 6, the thermal couplers there, you can see a thin wire. And that wire is been hooked to those bricks, and they're about 4 inches away from where that wall started. And every 5 minutes, he goes up and checks that wall for deflection, because we're trying to see how the effect of the fire is affecting the studs, and if we're going to have failure from a deflection perspective. And even if that wall looks exactly like that when the wall was test is done, if it deflects too much, we still fail. Now, the other interesting thing about that picture is at 50 minutes and 39 seconds, he's 4 7/8 inches away from 1700 degrees. So he's pretty sure that that wall is going to handle fine. You'll see some little wisps of white things up above on the very top there where the drywall meets that concrete lintel. That's actually the steam. That's actually the steam that's coming out of the drywall. That isn't smoke. So some other variables that you can use on your job sites. The size of studs are a minimum unless otherwise stated in a UL design. The reason that's important is because maybe you have a 3 5/8 stud specified, but you have an area in the wall, in a certain wall, where you need to put something else in there and you need to move to a 6-inch depth. As long as everything is the same, does that still meet a fire rating? That let's say U5646 fire rating? Yes, it does. And the spacing of studs is a maximum unless otherwise stated. So again, this is important because if you've got a high area and you've got some limiting heights and you've specified a 465, again, that non-bearing 1-hour rated wall that we use commonly everywhere, but in one particular area, you have a high area where you need to go to maybe an 18-foot stud and you need to move things a little closer to be able to get it in there and use the same gauge. Well, that's acceptable as well. And then spacing between parallel rows of studs are minimums. So again, if the test was done with a 1-inch minimum and you wanted to space it out to get some better sound attenuation and you had the real estate to be able to do that, you wanted to move to 4 inches to get a better STC, it still meets that fire rating. Because again, what we're talking about is an assembly application. And we saw it earlier in the slide. Gypsum is about 21% chemical water. Now, it's not like water you can squeeze out. It's chemically bound water, calcium sulfate dihydrate. And that's chemical water that when we reach a certain level starts to disintegrate, it starts to release, and that keeps things cooler and helps you from one side of that assembly to the other. Again, another one of those slides has a lot of words on it. Basically what that means is the board in the water is released as steam and acts as a thermal barrier. Several different types of gypsum. When I was growing up, there was these 3, regular, type X, type C. If you look at the very bottom piece of drywall, you'll see it's pretty thick. There's not a lot of voids in it. That's probably like an abuse-resistant board. And then the next one up is a 5/8 inch thick. It's thicker, and it will give you an opportunity to have the fire protection you need. But it has some voids in it. We've made it a little bit lighter, make it easier to handle, but it still meets the ASTM E119 test. And then the top one, it would be a 1/2 inch board. And that 1/2 inch shows a lot of voids because we're making it as light as we can. We're not so much concerned on a 1/2 inch like you would put in your house. We're not worried about a 1 hour rating, but all gypsum will give you some protection. If you have 1/2 inch drywall in your house and there's a fire on the other side of that wall, you've probably still got 28 to 30 minutes to get out. Perhaps there's some of you on the phone call that are from the Midwest, or perhaps you're history buffs and you're aware of the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire. I was hanging drywall in the mid to late 70s. I was actually at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and in March of 1977, they had a fire at the Beverly Hills Supper Club on the Kentucky side of the Cincinnati River. And there was a wood frame material. There was no Type X products back then. And there was 168 people died, another 270 were injured. It was one of probably the second biggest fire natural disaster in America. Within 2 years, we started to hang fire-rated drywall everywhere. The codes changed dramatically after that happened. And the way that the gypsum industry did this was and then we put fiberglass filaments in it. And the fiberglass filaments act like rebar. You can see on that right-hand picture how that piece of gypsum has been opened up. And you can see those fibers in it, and they help hold it together when it starts to lose its chemical water. Occasionally, in floor-to-ceiling applications, we want to have additional protection to keep holes and voids from opening up, because gypsum with 20% water, when it starts to get hot enough and that water starts to leave, it will want to shrink and it will want to start to pull away at the joints. That's one of the reasons why we tape the joints the way we do. But in those extreme situations, we also put a different product in there called vermiculite, unexpanded vermiculite, which when it reaches 1100 degrees starts to expand. So the theory is the water starts to come out and the vermiculite starts to fill that void because it's expanding, so that we don't get backdraft and we don't have flame spread from one area to the other. We don't get extra fire rating time out of it. It just contains the fire better and stops it from one spot to the other. So I often get the question, how do I know what type of gypsum is being installed? On the back of every piece of UL rated drywall, there's a requirement that it needs to have a UL stamp and some verbiage. And the UL stamps are specific not only to the manufacturer, they're specific to the plant that they were produced at. Inside this red box is what's required by UL. The reason there are other pictures here is especially after the Chinese drywall situation in the 90s, several manufacturers have added the made in USA. And it's always important to know the time that the board was put together and the date so that we can go back to the correct plant. But UL requires what's in that little red box. The gypsum board R3501 is a specific manufacturer. The issue number 3850 is a plant. And then that type FSW, that's a very important nomenclature. Fire shield wall board is that nomenclature of this particular manufacturer. So let's take an assembly. Let's find something generic. If you go to the first,
I have
couple
before
questions,
you just jump into that. I have a question here. Two questions so far. Is it possible to space studs too close together from a fire rating standpoint, not parallel rows? If studs are spaced 8 inches on center in lieu of 16, will it affect the fire resistance properties of a partition? And then I have another question about types. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If the fire assembly was tested at 16 inches on center and you moved to 8 inches on center, no, it does not hurt the fire rating at all for that assembly. You can't make them too close.
Okay. And then I had one more question about, does type C have any other physical properties that make it better for particular applications?
Yes and no. No, it won't give you a longer fire rating, but there are times where if an assembly has been tested with a Type C board, the Type C board needs to be installed in that to meet that particular fire rating. In other words, you cannot substitute a Type X product for a Type C product. You can add a Type C product in place of where a Type X was. If you have a regular Type X fire rated drywall and they by mistake put up Type C in a ceiling application, that's acceptable. If that assembly was tested with Type C and somebody puts up Type X, then they're going to have to go back and either put another layer of Type X on it or a layer of Type C. And we commonly see that. I can understand why. That's an excellent question. I can see why that was asked, because that happens quite a bit in our industry, because people don't, from a contracting level, they don't always understand the difference, and the products look exactly the same except for the tabs, the end tabs. So in the first 10 pages of the UL directory, there's a chart. If you knew nothing about where to find a product, there's a chart that shows groups of construction, load bearing, non-load bearing, beams, roofs, ceilings. There's types of membranes that go from concealed grids to drywall and metal lath to concrete, protected and unprotected. And there's an assembly chart that you could use there. You could go to it and find it. And gypsum tends to be somewhere between the 400 and the 600s. So you'll get a wall partition type, which walls will be U, V, or W, depending on how old or how new they are. And then, we'll look down here, it's 400 to 500. You got metal stud, gypsum lath, plaster. We're going to pick a 465. I've referenced it several times. The reason I've referenced it is because it's that non-load bearing wall and it's the most common one out there. Every manufacturer will have their own number. The particular company I work for has tested this assembly that's in this umbrella of 465, and the reference for our particular one is V438. But when you go to the UL, it would give you those words in parentheses so you'd know there was other manufacturers there. And when you look down through this, you'll see that there were other ones. Now, just quickly, I will tell you, when you look at this, the insulation only goes halfway across. And so what that tells me is this assembly is a fire rated assembly with or without insulation. Some are and some aren't. But in this particular case, when you see it halfway across, that's a quick reference way for you to say, okay, I can use it or I don't have to. When you go down to number 3, which is the bats and blankets, you can see it says optional. But these UL rated assemblies, and that's the reason the authorities and the code officials are so sticklers about it, they will tell you exactly how to build this and exactly what it looks like. 25 gauge galvanized metal studs, 24 inches on center. The gypsum board, it'll tell you how often to put screws in. Now it says in this particular area, screws spaced 8 inches on center on the edge of the board and 12 inches on center in the field. If you went 8 and 8, if your contractor went 8 and 8, that's okay because you're using more. That's all right. Now this particular picture doesn't have RC listed on it, but it actually is as an option. You can see item 6, we go down to item 6, it shows resilient channels or furring channels. So it's important to read all of the verbiage all the way around to know exactly what is said. We talked about core types earlier. Each manufacturer has different core types that can be used in different assemblies. So let's rest on this slide for a second. If you've specified that 1 hour non-load bearing wall and you had it in different parts of the building, you've got 5/8 on both sides, FSW on both sides, that's fine. You know you've got your 1 hour rating. But let's say you have an area where you want to put it up against a bathroom and you might have maybe a glass mat panel, a tile backer of some kind on one side of that wall. In this particular case, you'd want to make sure that it said the U465 said FSW and FSW6, because then one side of that wall could be glass mat panels. If you had some moisture resistant drywall, some drop-in panels, if you had different, this is the area where of the UL where you'd want to look at it to say, I can use different products in this wall assembly and still meet that 1 hour rating. Joint compound, understand that whether it's 1 or 2 coats, there needs to be a fire rating on all of it. We have some frequently asked questions, and I've got to get moving a little bit. I'm running close here. What does it say to mean that your particular wall or ceiling assembly has achieved a 1 hour fire rating? Well, it meets that ASTM E119 test for at least 60 minutes. When constructing a fire rated design, must the exact stud size be used in the test? No, they're minimums unless otherwise stated in the design. My fire rated system was tested with nails. Can I fasten the wallboard with screws? Well, we went over that earlier. Absolutely. Screws can be used as an alternative to nails as long as they're substituted 1 for 1 with common or better products. Can I add fiber insulation to a fire-rated partition design when it's not specified as a component? This one is a little more complicated. There's 2 answers. Yes, you can, as long as you do not exceed the depth of the wall cavity. And remember what I said earlier about once you put pressure on drywall under duress, you've weakened it, because wherever the burn is, you're going to have less structural capability and reliability on that side that's being burnt. So if the insulation, if you had 6 inches of insulation stuffed in there and the drywall guys just went 6 and 6 on a pattern and stuffed it in there and there was a fire, it would want to expand more quickly. So it needs to be the size of the wall cavity or less. And then again, when we look at the floor ceiling assemblies, anytime you add anything to it, you're probably going to have to add another layer of drywall over and above what was tested. What's the difference between type X and regular? That extra material that we put in, think about that fiberglass, those fibers that help maintain the integrity of the core when it starts to be under duress and it starts to calcine. We won't want to hold it together like rebar. And then here's the #1 question that we get asked. What is the fire rating for my 5/8 type X drywall? And the answer, of course, is drywall has no fire rating. Fire ratings are an assembly. So hopefully that's given you some, this is the end of the AIA portion. Hopefully that's given you some direction as to how the testing is done at UL. We went pretty quickly through the slides at the beginning that kind of went through how you got to the online and how you worked through it. So if anybody would like to have those slides in a PDF, I'd be happy to compose them and send them over to you.
Thad, I do have one more question that came in.
Yes.
If we've got a second. It says, if I have a 1 hour metal deck roof assembly that is rated without bad insulation, and I want to increase thermal insulation with below the deck bats, can I do that?
And I'm assuming that they want to put drywall under there. We're talking about the metal. And again, it's here we have 2 different situations. Are we talking about fire from without, from like a Warnock, from a FM requirement, or underneath from a UL requirement? And you know, if someone, if you know, my contact information will be available afterwards, and in that particular area, if they'd want to follow up with me afterwards, I'll be happy to follow up on that specific assembly.
The person says no gypboard.
No gypboard. Okay, repeat what they wrote.
If I have a 1-hour metal deck roof assembly that's installed without that insulation, and then he wants to increase the thermal insulation with below the deck bat, can he do that?
Yeah, and I will say I'd still like to see the assembly, because I would say yes without knowing exactly the requirements of what he's trying to do. But yes, I'd like to talk offline to make sure that I've got that and I understand exactly what's happening there.
Okay. So is your contact information in here in the slides?
Everyone will get an email from me after the presentation giving my contact information. You'll get the certificate, et cetera, et cetera.
Perfect. So yes, that Klaus can ask you the question then.
Well, that's, again, we're National Gypsum folks. We're the largest domestic manufacturer in the country. We touch all of your markets because we cover the entire country. Thank you very much for having me here today. I've enjoyed putting on the presentation, some wonderful questions. And if you have any more, feel free when you get your communication to get back to us.
Thank you very much, Thad. This was a great presentation, and I know we're running real close on time, so I'm just going to give a quick plug. Keep an eye on your email and keep an eye on the website for next month's presentation, which is going to be Fundamentals of Construction Estimating with Dan Frondorf, and it should be another great one. So hopefully we'll see you soon, and I hope everybody stays safe and keeps it all together. All right, have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.